She didn't know about the guerrillas in East Pakistan. One thing that really struck me, the blown up ships, and that takes a lot of technical training. I wonder where they got that.
Of about 6 or 7 naval officers with basically diving specialization. We were told we are to recruit select youth from Bangladesh for our operations to act as naval commandos. They were to be trained within a matter of 3 months to launch a first attack on Pakistan shipping in Chittagong, Narayanganj, and about selected Pakistani inland and main ports of East Pakistan. And we established the camp in a place called Plassey, where the Battle of Plassey was fought.
Nations rarely speak about their covert operations, but individuals sometimes do. Operation X is the only detailed account of an Indian covert operation written by someone who actually planned and executed it.
Welcome everyone. I'm so very happy today to be co-hosting this session with Shreya. This is our 13th author interaction. We started since July 2020. And today I am really very happy that we have Sandeep Unnithan with us. He's the executive editor of India Today magazine, and he writes on all the national security issues, military and defense issues. He's a graduate in ancient Indian history from St Xaviers. He's written a book way back in 2014 by the name of Black Tornado. In fact, very happy to announce that it's been made into a OTT web series this March, and it is already streaming and it's already trending really well. It's really been made extremely well. And this year, his second book, co-authored with late Captain MNR Samant, has been released by the name of Operation X. Sandeep, welcome to our forum, and thanks to Mr. Atul Kulkarni for connecting us together. I have to really admit that yesterday I really binge watched the serial State of Siege, and what an incredible serial to the very well-researched and amazing book, Black Tornado. Welcome, Sandeep.
Neeta. Thanks, Neeta. Thank you, Shreya. Thanks for having me on your show. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about two of my books. Very close to my heart. In fact, I've only written 2 books, but it's been a fascinating journey, and absolutely looking forward to recounting, what went into the writing of these 2 books. Very interesting subjects and very challenging subjects. So, yeah, over to you, Neeta.
First of all, Sandeep, your book Black Tornado, which was released in 2014, as we all know, is about 26/11 attacks in Mumbai, which is indeed a very sensitive issue to all of us till now. So I have to really start by asking, what really propelled you to write about such a sensitive topic in the first place?
Well, Neeta, in 2008, now I write on defense and security. I'm based here in Delhi. I write for a national magazine called India Today. And this was the big story in 2008, one of the largest terror attacks on India in Mumbai. And while researching this subject, I came across a lot of information, and I realized early on that, this information wouldn't suffice in a magazine article. I mean, it was far greater than just a magazine article or even a series of magazine articles. It was actually worthy of a book. Now, a lot of books have been written around 26/11, so I had to take a little time to talk to the commandos who were actually, participating in the operation. Now, that I figured was the USP. It hadn't been done in previous books. A lot of books came out immediately after 26/11, but there was no book that actually went into the entire decision-making process and what were the challenges of this very unique counter-terrorist operation. I mean, this kind of an attack, Neeta, has never happened before in the history of the world.
Right.
A multi-stage, multi-site terror attack. hitting multiple targets in one very small geographical area simultaneously. It's designed to, confuse the police and the security forces. And indeed, that's the reason it is actually a military operation. The 26/11 attacks were a military operation carried out by civilians, the terrorists of the Lashkar-e-Taiba. So this was a very unique chance for me to write on this book. And that's the reason I actually wrote Black Tornado.
So, right. Tell me, Sandeep, how's the journey been, from writing this very popular book? This has been a bestseller for the last so many years, and now it has been adapted into the series. So what was the whole process like? I mean, how did you feel about the whole process from a bestseller to making it being made into a serial?
Yeah, so Neeta, it's one of the greatest things that a book writer can aspire to is, having your book converted into a web series, brought on screen or OTT or whatever the case may be. But this book actually was, it was growing as the years went by, because as more and more evidence came out, we knew well by 2014 and 2015 indeed that this was not an ordinary terror attack. Of course, we knew that in 2008, but the evidence slowly built up over the years. The fact that when newer people were arrested, new suspects like David Headley, for instance, and we knew that why is it that they were able to attack so many targets with such precision? They were carrying GPS sets with them. They knew exactly where to attack, where to land, what turns to take. These were a group of 10 people who had never been in Mumbai. In fact, they'd never left Pakistan. They had spent their entire lives in Pakistan. And for someone to come all the way, thousands of kilometers away, land in a big city the size of Mumbai. People like us get lost in Mumbai, but here you had these 10 guys steering their way to targets like cruise missiles. They knew exactly where to go, which rooms to go to, which entrance to take, what turns to take. All this was because of David Headley's reconnaissance. And all this kind of built up as I was researching the book. In 2008, there was no David Headley. He was arrested much later. So this was virtually like a work in progress. And finally, in 2014, I put the book down in writing, and then we, after several years, Contilo Pictures, of course, approached me, Abhimanyu Singh. They wanted to convert this into an OTT series. Now, it was challenging. Very few movies had been made on this. In fact, there's a Hotel Mumbai in English. There's been a Ram Gopal Varma film as well. But it's a huge challenge for anyone to convert this into a feature film, the way we understand it. And friends of mine, scriptwriter friends who looked at it said that it's very challenging. It's a very, very challenging subject to translate onto screen because you have very few characters who are there from the beginning to the end, and there's so many characters. There are so many little stories there. You have incredible stories of courage, of bravery, of cowardice, and treachery. All those kind of stories. It's like many, many, many stories wrapped into one. So it's a big challenge for a filmmaker or indeed an OTT platform maker to identify those strands. And I think that's the challenge that Abhimanyu and his team also faced, and they handled it beautifully because it had a very, it was a seamless transition from a book to OTT, and you just saw it yesterday. But that's been the verdict of a lot of people who've seen it, that it does full justice to the book. And as a writer, my main concern was that when they approached me, I said, look, my only request to you is that do not make this into a Bollywood film, or, don't make it melodramatic. I would like to see, a documentary kind of a film. It should make people aware of what exactly went on, without sensationalizing or dramatizing too much, and telling people exactly what went on there. It's a very solemn affair. There's so many hundreds of people died. People are traumatized even till today. When you talk of 26/11, everyone knows where they were on that night, and indeed the days which followed. So you had to handle this with a lot of sensitivity, and I'm really happy they did full justice to the book, and indeed such a challenging subject. Neeta.
But I must say that you've done so much of research in writing this book, even the minutest of details. If go through the book, and you have mentioned, I don't know, how many years did you really take in writing this book, researching so deeply?
It
And how are you, you were really, because it's been part of your personal journey as well, because I read somewhere you were staying somewhere near the site where it happened, all the sites. So how were you connected with the whole affair? What
okay.
made you
Now,
write this?
that's a very interesting question, Neeta. And the thing is that I'm from Mumbai, right? I've spent a lot of my growing years in Colaba. And I know every single place that the terrorists attacked, right from the Machimar Nagar jetty where they landed to all the sites, Colaba, and in fact the route that the terrorists took to enter Colaba market and the Kabad house is the route that I used to take to go from home to school. My school was in Colaba, so it was, in a sense, they were going over all the places that were very, very significant to me from my childhood. And here's the other thing, that one of the targets that David Headley Recce, he built up a library of targets that he wanted the terrorists to attack all over the city. So it was an entire library of targets. And one of the targets happened to be the housing society where my parents lived in Powai. Now, my father was in the Navy, and he retired from the Navy many years ago. And they live, they're retired people. They live in this housing society, and he chose that as a potential target. Of course, I haven't mentioned that in the book, but so in a sense, this was very, very personal to me as well. We had a Mumbai police armored personnel car, the vehicle standing outside my parents' building for at least 2 years after it became known that this was one of the targets. So in a sense, everyone, especially from Mumbai, when a city that's so close to you that you've spent some wonderful years of your life gets attacked. I mean, it's a very, very incredibly personal journey, and that it was for me as well. So it took me about 2 or 3 years to get the research in place. And the problem here, Neeta, again, in this case was that a lot of the personnel then was serving. They were all in the army, and they were all covered by the Armed Forces Acts, and they could not speak very freely. So it took me a while to convince the army to get those interviews officially, from the, while I was speaking with them unofficially, they said, look, beyond a point, we can't communicate with you, because if the book comes out, it's got all our names, the obvious question would be, how is he getting all this information? So I had to actually convince the army to allow me access to the commandos who took part in that operation. And that kind of came out very well. The Navy as well, because let's not forget, Neeta, there was a Marine Commando intervention there on the night of 26/11. It's very crucial because it helped save a lot of lives in the chambers of the Taj Mahal. Over 100 guests who were trapped there, VIPs, politicians, and businessmen, women and children, they were all stuck there in that in the chambers of Taj. And had the Marine Commandos not entered, they would have really, God forbid, terrible consequences would have followed. And that really helped me. The Navy actually opened up access. They allowed me to interview their commandos as well. So I got a fairly comprehensive account of what happened. And like I told you, because of the official, the reason that a lot of the people were serving, that it took a while, but I'm just happy it turned out well.
All of us here in Delhi and all parts of India were really hooked on for 3 days with the entire tragedy. And then reading your book and then again watching the serial, it's just bringing back all the memories. They're not good memories at all, but you come back and you think about it. And I think it was the worst terror attack, very personal to all of us. Very, coming back to the serial, I also read somewhere that Lieutenant Colonel Sandeep Sen, who was the head of the commandos who attacked the Khabar house, he was also involved in the serial. So, a lot of, I think, close work went on. I mean, I think he also trained all the actors in the serial. So did you get them together, or how it happened?
Well, it's just an incredible coincidence, Neeta, that Lieutenant Colonel Sandeep Sen happened to be one of my most important sources in piecing together the entire operation. In fact, he was the person that I met with soon after 26/11, and I began discussing the possibility of doing stories around 26/11, what exactly happened. And he was a great insight. And it's really important for a journalist to have sources to tell you, and especially people who've taken part, first person accounts, who've taken part in the actual operation. So he was a great asset to me, and then he retired. He retired from the army, and he was hired as a consultant by Contilo Pictures. So as you mentioned, he's trained the commandos, he's trained the terrorists even. In fact, it's really important to have someone who understands the nuances, of how the military works, and in the case of terrorists, how to hold a weapon, those kind of things, the body language of commandos, the body language of terrorists. Here is an officer with over 25 years of experience in counterinsurgency, and actually taking part in the 26/11 operation. So he was like a godsend to the TV crew, just as it had been for me while writing the book.
I think that was one of the most important things that helped make the series so authentic.
Yes.
And that is why it translated so well from the book to the series.
Yes, he did. Like I said, that little thing of body language. Now, we a lot of movies, especially in India, they get the uniform right, they get the look right, but they don't get the body language right for some reason. So here I actually saw him on the set. It was fascinating because he was telling them exactly how a commando stands. He doesn't hunch, he doesn't stoop, he stands like that, and and the exact posture in which to hold a weapon, and how you move, all those little minute details that we miss out in the normal course. That is what he really brought into this thing. And that's the reason that the difference between Indian films and what the films that you see, military themed films that you see abroad, not just Hollywood, but any other Western movie industry, is the fact that the realism that comes in there, the authenticity of not just the costumes, but the fact that many of the actors have been through military camps, to give them a whole feel of this whole thing. And that's something, unfortunately, we don't invest in very much in India. It's just like another film, and you have actors walking on from one set to another set. So that's something that they did differently in this, fortunately.
Yes, that's true. And that's very important. Something I'm very curious about is that, of course, we all know that you are the chief editor at India Today, and you're by profession a journalist. You've been trained in that. So and you've, of course, other than being a journalist, you've written 2 non-fiction military books. So how did that transition happen? What made you realize that maybe you want to write about the military history and, the 26/11? What was your transition? Why did you get into that?
Well, Shreya, I'm executive editor at India Today, and as Neeta said, I write on military affairs, defense, national security. So these 2 books are, in fact, an extension of what I write on. So it's just like I would write a long magazine article, a long read magazine article, and then a book would be an extra long magazine story with chapters, and that's how I see it. A really long, well-researched magazine article, which would, of course, extend to more than just, say, 3,000 words or 4,000 words, goes over to 50 and 60,000 words. But so it's actually an extension of what I do at work. So that transition really doesn't, work in my sense. It would in the event of me writing something that was totally different, a genre that was, say, fiction, or something about medieval history, that one of my passions, But in this case, this is the kind of the body of work that I handle as a professional, and all my contacts and all of that comes in handy while writing a book. So it's very easy, actually. It's just the focus that really matters. That you have to take time out from work. I have a very hectic work life, and then to break away from that means that I have to sacrifice weekends, and so I'm writing through weekends and whenever I get a little time. So it's a big challenge, but not too difficult.
Okay. So just like an extension.
And it's an extension of,
also is sort of similar, since it's non-fiction.
Yes.
And we're not, right. I get it. So, of course, we all know about the fact that when we talk about 26/11, one of the biggest thing was that it was live broadcasted. And that was also one of the blunders, because a lot of things got revealed that we did not want because since the siege was going on and that got revealed.
Right.
Looking at that, and of course, looking at the present scenario, when we talk about so much of fake news and so much of sensationalizing news that is going on around nowadays, and of course, you are a journalist, so I have to ask you this question: that when you're writing and when you're taking out a news item, how difficult it is for you to decide, something between a news item that would guarantee you an audience and between something that is actually very factual and very few people might be interested to indulge in. So how difficult does that turn out to be in the real
Right.
world?
That's a good question, Shreya. And in fact, like in the way Kargil was our first television war, 26/11 was our first terror attack that was broadcast live on television. In fact, the television that you see around, the TV shows, the kind of 9 p.m. discussions that you see around you today actually began 12 years back, or a little before that. 26/11 was one of the big kickoff points because you had people hooked onto television sets across the country and indeed the world. And you had a new format of television programming that emerged, where I don't want to take names, but I'm sure you know who started this whole thing of the studio debates and discussions, and there was a lot of outrage also at the fact that we didn't react the way we should have, and there were a lot of mistakes that were made. And one of the biggest mistakes, Shreya, which you brought out, is the fact that there was live coverage of the attacks as they unfolded. And that was really unfortunate because these things hadn't been thought through by the government, I guess. There were no protocols in place, or if there were protocols, there was no one to enforce them on the ground. Like if you see in 9/11, for instance, or indeed 9/11 was in 2001, and you had the London bombings of 2005, there was no live coverage. I mean, the cameras were all out. You had the towers burning, but you had the media not focusing on what was going on in the towers. The very, very horrific scenes of people actually falling off buildings even before they collapsed, the towers. We saw that much later in photographs, but media was off limits then. They were looking at it from a distance. They were not covering it live. The same thing happened in the London attacks as well, because Shreya, I think the problem is that we didn't think these through. Like I said, we hadn't studied these attacks in the depth that we ought to, in terms of figuring out protocols, like how is the government to act in case we were hit by a massive terror attack like 9/11 or a London bombing in 2005. What are the protocols we need to put into place? What is the line that we need to draw for the media, that this is the line that you cannot cross? Who will enforce that line? Who will be the spokesperson? All of this actually, all these failings came out in the night of 26/11, and indeed in the days that followed. There was utter confusion all around. You had TV cameras broadcasting those operations live, and you actually had, for the first time, you had the terrorists who had a control room in Karachi, in Pakistan. They were watching this live, and they, in a sense, they were using television as closed circuit television cameras. It was just like they had an entire window into the operation. They were watching, monitoring it. And you had this ridiculous scene of the terrorist handler calling up his terrorists there and asking, throw a grenade outside, let me see what the reaction is. And you could virtually see it in real time. So these were things that hadn't been thought through by the government. A lot of self-censorship needs to be done, Shreya, at times like this. We have to take a call that there are certain things that we will not show live, whether it is commandos being brought down onto a building, or rescue scenes, or revealing the position of potential hostages inside a live hostage situation, which could have become catastrophic. And that's indeed what happened in the Taj siege, where you had television broadcasting the location of hostages. They actually gave specific areas of the hotel where they were lodged, and the handlers calling the terrorists. You had intercepts. The evidence is out there. You had intercepts of the handlers telling the terrorists, go and target the hostages who are here. You have VVIPs, you have all kinds of people there. Take them prisoner, and India will be on its knees. So these kind of things I guess the media didn't think through at that time because like I mentioned, there was no one from the government side to draw the line and say you cannot go beyond this, no one to enforce that. And I think the media also made a lot of mistakes, and the lessons that we see now, for instance, if there is a terror attack, God forbid, should never be one. In case there is one, the protocols are now in place. There is going to be no live coverage. In fact, channels that have covered this live have received notices from the government and very strong warnings from the government. So the message has gone down the line somewhere. Now, as a journalist, it's really important for us to draw the line on, there's a kind of we have a free press. That's one of our biggest strengths being in a democracy. But we also have the responsibility of not revealing too much in what we write. So that is a call that we have to take, that whether we reveal true positions. All these the rules are all there, but it is for us, because we live in a democracy, we have to be aware of those rules at all times. In a situation, for instance, a live standoff with China in Ladakh, what is the information that you can put out? I mean, can you reveal, for instance, that you saw a certain position, a military position here, which wasn't reported, or a certain formation had moved in, which no one knew of, and you have this great story, but you have to put it out, alerting the enemy. So these are calls that journalists have to take all the time, Shreya.
Very true, very true. And specifically, this was something that we all observed during 26/11 and the following terrorist attacks, that how important a role the media plays, because of course that is the first-hand information that we get as the normal people, since we are not on the ground there and we don't know what's the reality. But more so we saw during the pandemic, that we saw so much of fake news, and we saw the real news, and it became very difficult. And that is when in 2020 there was a huge surge of the realization that how important it is, the real role of media and of conveying true factual information. So of course, as you said, very important. And now moving on to your second book that you've written, Operation X, which you co-authored with late Captain Samant, who was a Mahavir Chakra awardee. I have to tell you, for everyone who doesn't know, this book has been widely acclaimed as, a very fast-paced novel, and it's meticulously researched and has a historical narrative. And I'm sure all of you would want to go back and read this because, after I read it, I finished it so quickly because it was so interesting and, so interesting to delve into. So I have to ask you, when you first decided to write this with Captain Samant, how did the decision came out to be? Because of course you were writing about an operation that took place almost 50 years before the book released. So what exactly made you realize that, now is the time that you need to write about this?
Well, Shreya, Captain Samant wanted to put out his memoirs, and he'd been working on it for a number of years. So in a sense, he chose me to, partner with him to write that book. So I'm really honored, very, very privileged that he chose me to, team up with him for this book. And as you mentioned, he played a very, very key role in this. Very few people know about this operation. It's a covert operation. It was kept classified, above top secret for many, many years. It would be, in fact, I believe that it is the largest operation of its kind after the Second World War. The fact that you've trained college students to become naval commandos and attack merchant ships, teaching them swimming techniques, using our diving teams to teach them. So this was a very unique operation, and Captain Samant played a very crucial role in this. And I'm really grateful. Apart from the fact that he chose me, is the fact that he chose to tell his story, because I believe Indians are very poor record keepers. We are very poor raconteurs. We don't value history the way other countries, the way the big P5 nations value history, and particularly military history. We're just content to let matters be and people pass on and take their stories with them. But Captain Samant, to his credit, he decided to put this down in writing, a very authentic account of what happened. And this is the only story written about an Indian covert operation by someone who's been actually part of the entire process. right? Very few covert operations have actually been written about. This is one of them. And, in what Captain Samant did, he gave us the biggest gift, the gift of knowledge. The fact that you knew so much about an operation that nobody knew. In fact, even very few people in the Navy knew about it. It was that confidential, that classified. So, it was a very small operation. Very few people knew about it even then in 71. It was the Prime Minister, of course, and a very few people in the Navy and RNAW. A very small team, which is why the information never leaked out until much later. So it's again all thanks to Captain Samant, and what a great giant of a man. He's given us, like I said, the gift of knowledge.
So very right, Sandeep. I would say that this book indeed is a must-read for any history buff, because it's a valuable addition to the repository of popular writing in contemporary Indian military history. So how was your experience, personal experience of writing and co-authoring a book with late Captain MNR Samant?
Yeah, Neeta, like I mentioned, I mean, it was absolutely, I was delighted to meet him, and the fact that, it was a kind of a test for me, to convince him that I was the right person to partner with for this book. And it so happened that this was a book that had always been in my mind for many years. There's another very important character in the book, Admiral Mihir Roy, who was the director of naval intelligence.
Yes.
He had written this book about 25 years back, where he spoke about the role of the Mukti Bahini frogmen, the naval aspect of the Mukti Bahini, which not many people knew about. And but now in that book, he never revealed the fact that it was the Indian Navy that was training, supporting, and arming them. He just left a lot of clues, right through the book, a lot of clues for future historians to follow up and write. And so this book had always been in the back of my mind. And when I got the call that would you like to meet Captain Samant, I immediately connected two and two. I said, I think I know what he wants to talk about. And so when I met him, I said, sir, are you going to talk to me about this? Because this is a story that's already in my mind. I know who you are. So it was very interesting. It was a fascinating experience to work with him, and very quiet person, very, very self-effacing, very wry sense of humor, great sense of humor, terrific person. Probably one of the very few Indian officers. He was one of our pioneering submariners,
Very right.
When we raised the submarine arm way back in the 60s, he was one of our first submarine captains. He'd been trained by the Royal Navy, and he had been trained by the Soviet Navy. So you have a case of, someone who's been trained by one Navy crossing over into another. So he had the experience of three navies, you can say. Very, very outstanding officer, and, it was such a delight to work with him. And I would always call him, I could always count on him for help. And he would just reel it out with incredible precision, his memory of those events. Indeed, there were other people on his team as well who helped. But he was he held the keys, so to speak. And when he spoke, every time it was like, it was like this window that he opened into another world. And if you see this chart over here, there's this fabulous chart that we put together of the entire operation. That's big thing here that you can see. It's a bonus for the readers who pick up the book. It talks about the entire span of the operation, the number of people that it had. You had a covert little navy with gunboats. You had these assault swimmers being trained in camps. You had these launch pads. So it was a complete new world that very few people even knew about. So every time he would speak, it was like one more piece of the puzzle would get added on. And but yet I must to his credit, he never actually told me everything. He was always very wary, and he would either not tell me everything, or he would say, look, this, I don't want this to come in the book because this has certain ramifications. So in a sense, he was, censoring himself also. He kind of knew what he could put out, what he couldn't. And so, but what an experience it's been to work with someone of his stature.
Something that was very interesting for me was that growing up, I have always, read a lot about our army, even our air force to an extent. I've seen books, I've read I've seen movies, I've read books, but very rarely have I heard and read about operations by the Navy. And of course, Operation X clearly, gives us the fact that we need to applaud them as much. So why do you think that is, that, there's a difference between the amount of information available, at least on these platforms, about our Navy as compared to our Army and our Air Force?
Shreya, this topic I've mentioned in the book as well. The fact that why the Navy didn't get adequate importance in post-independent India is the fact that all our contested boundaries are on land. We have like over 4,000 kilometers of contested borders with China. We have over 700 kilometers of a disputed boundary with Pakistan. All our focus has been on land. In the maritime domain where the Navy rules, where we don't have any maritime disputes as such. And the reason that the Navy is not spoken about very much is we have a fantastic Navy. I mean, it's one of the best navies in the world. I would rate them very highly. But the fact is that the Navy has not seen action the way the Army or indeed the Air Force has. In fact, it's been part of just one war. That was the 1971 war. They were kept out of the 1965 war by the government for reasons best known to them. And the Navy has always been seen as a weapon of last resort, that we will use them at the very end. We will not use them in the beginning of a conflict. In whether it was in 1962 or in 65, the Navy was kept out of it. They could have done a lot of things with the Navy, but I guess a lot of our political leaders didn't kind of have the vision to use the Navy the way it should have been used, which they did in 1971. Because if you see the kind of operations in 1971, like the covert war that this book, Operation X, talks about, the fact that we used an aircraft carrier against East Pakistan. We used missile boats very innovatively to attack Pakistani warships off Karachi. Very, very innovative use of naval platforms. And so the reason actually the Navy has not been adequately highlighted is the fact that, like I mentioned, you have a counterinsurgency where the Army plays a very big role. You have occasionally the Air Force carrying out, like a Balakot kind of attack and all. The Navy has not had that chance, though it's a formidable presence in the Indian Ocean region, whether it's fighting piracy or, humanitarian supplies or intercepting, preventing a coup in the Maldives. It's a very important weapon of the state, but it's not being used the way it should have been.
Yes, yes.
Exactly. Right, Sandeep. I have one last question from our side, and then we'll go on to the much awaited interactive round with your readers who are here and waiting patiently for you. And then we have a quiz also, where people will be winning some books which are going to be signed by you, and they're really looking forward to that. One last question, and it has been really on the top of my mind since we started talking about this session and everything. Tell me, Sandeep, what is the common thread between Operation X and Black Tornado? Because both books might be dissimilar, but at the same time, I feel they're about the covert wars. I mean, what
absolutely.
Is your take on that?
Yes, Neeta, you've hit the nail on the head. And in fact, while you might think that the books are, they are similar in the sense that they are military histories, and they might seem dissimilar because one is about the 1971 war, the run-up, and the other is a terrorist attack. But these two books are actually about covert wars. Now, what is a covert war? A covert war is an overt war. If you can call it an overt war, a full-scale war is a declared war where two countries go to war. There is a formal declaration of war and there is hostilities commence. We've seen it in 65, in 62, 71, and indeed 1999. But a covert war is a kind of war where the state does not take ownership of anything. That's exactly what happened in 1971. You had India training the Mukti Bahini, the Bangladeshi freedom fighters, training the naval commandos, but not taking ownership of these operations. The Mukti Bahini were raised, trained, and equipped by the Indian Army and the Navy, and indeed the Air Force, but they never took ownership of this. So it was a covert thing. Covert wars are something that states will never take ownership of. 26/11, the attack on Mumbai was a covert war. Like I mentioned in the beginning, it is actually a military operation carried out by Pakistan's deep state, that's the Pakistan Army, ISI, using civilians, that is the Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorists. And the aim of this whole thing was deception. The 10 terrorists who landed there were given ID cards of a college in Hyderabad. The whole aim was to make it look like it had been an attack carried out by Indians on India. The aim was for all 10 of them to have died fighting the security forces, and they would find their ID cards, and they would say that, look, these are all Indian students who decided to turn on Mumbai. So it was a very, very complicated, wheels within wheels kind of thing. It's a very, very diabolical conspiracy, if you can call it that. But that's the way covert operations are. It is states will never take responsibility for this. And Mumbai has been a city that has been at the receiving end of a 15-year covert war by the Pakistan state. It started in 1993 with the serial blasts. You had them in 2006 with the train bombings, and finally in 2008 with the 26/11 attacks. So all these operations were covert attacks planned by the Pakistan military, but carried out by non-state actors like Dawood Ibrahim's crime syndicate in 93, the LET in 2006, and again in 2008. So that's the common thread between these two books, covert wars.
Fantastic. I wouldn't say that we are ending on this note. We are coming back again, but we'll start with our interactive round. Shreya, will you like to take over, please?
Yes. So for the interactive round, I would be unmuting you, and I would request you to switch on your videos so that you can directly interact with our guest. And also, we will conduct the quiz, and you can privately answer me in the chat, and the person who answers first will receive the book signed by Sir. So I think we can start.
Yeah, Shreya, first we'll take up Mr. Brian Lobo. He's the Senior VP Head Corporate Edelweiss, and he's also closely associated with FINS. Can you please unmute him?
Yes.
Thank you, Neeta. Sandeep, fascinating. The book X is really about the Navy's secret operation in Bangladesh war. Undoubtedly, the Navy did play a stellar role. My question is, however, why is there no strategy to sign a long-term pact with Bangladesh? Look at China. China today has a strong presence in Chittagong and Myanmar, while the US is very strong in the South Pacific, in the South Chinese Sea, rather. We are the weakest, even in our own backyard IOR. So did we let down our Navy or fail to plan a long-term naval strategy is question one. Our Navy doctrine, to me, accordingly, should plan for supremacy in IOR as well as Indo-Pacific. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Lobo. It's a very interesting question. It's a very good question. And I think that the problem here is the fact that we have a long-term strategy. The government knows what to do, but it takes us time to implement strategies. And you don't have to look beyond what's happening now on the border with China. The infrastructure bill that's going on, it's accelerated tremendously in the last couple of years, but the long-term strategy to deal with China, we thought it was a danger that was, further down the road, many years hence. We didn't realize that the Chinese had been planning this much earlier, that they were not going to wait, they were not going to move in when we wanted them to move, when we were ready. So in that sense, there's a huge gap between our intentions, capabilities, and our execution. That's the biggest problem I see. And I don't think it's so much a resource constraint as much as it is a failure to actually do what you mean to do. And like you correctly pointed out, the fact that our naval collaboration with Bangladesh wasn't of the order that it should have been after 71. In fact, there have been periods when our relationship with Bangladesh has been, fluctuating. And of course, it has to do also with the fact that there were regimes in Bangladesh that were not very friendly to us. But to cultivate a long-term strategy, to invest in long-term relationships, that's a big major problem that we see. Like I mentioned, there is a huge gap between our intentions and indeed our execution. So that's the short answer to this.
Do you think it's a lack of political will?
I think it's the way, I think we're comparing, when we compare ourselves to China. Now, the thing is that the Chinese have 100-year vision on things almost. They started out in 1949, and somewhere down the line, they decided that they're going to dominate the world by 2049. And they've put in all those processes into place. They've put in all those structures that they feel will enable them to get to that goal. So they, in a sense, they're running a 100-year marathon. And that's a title of a book as well. It's a fascinating book called The 100-Year Marathon. You should keep. Our horizons, unfortunately, are constrained to 5-year terms. That a government that comes to power, his primary objective as the leader of the largest party that comes to power is survival. He doesn't even know if he's going to be there beyond 5 years. So, in a system like that, I'm not saying it's a bad system, but that's the way democracies are. But these kind of systems don't allow long-term vision and, uninterrupted long-term visions that will be pursued by governments irrespective of who is in power. The United States has got that. Great powers do that. I see that while political parties might change, the institutions that power these goals, those national goals that have been set, are absolutely on track. But here, a lot of it actually comes from the political party that's driving that objective. Like, for instance, the last the government that was in power, the UPA, their strategy was to engage with Pakistan, irrespective of terror attacks and irrespective of the fact that you would have Mumbai's and you would have Mumbai attacked once, twice, 3 times, but talks must continue. Whereas this government has taken a very conscious decision that we will not talk to Pakistan until the time that they dismantle the infrastructure of terrorism. I think that's a very sensible policy, because there's no point in talking to someone who is hell-bent on wrecking your cities, sending terrorists across, lighting fires in your home, resting in that assurance that you have no option but to talk to him. So that's again the short answer to this. It's a very long debate, but that's how I think it is. Our horizons somehow very constrained in the way our governments operate.
I agree with you. Neeta, over to you for more questions.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Shreya, can you please unmute Mr. Atul Kulkarni? He's the member Board of Governors of IIM Shillong. But before that, you can also ask first question of the quiz.
Yes, so I would be asking a question, and everybody please tell me the answer in the chat. So the first question is, the 2611 terrorist carried fake ID cards of which Indian college? Please tell me the name and the city. City has actually already been answered, but you can tell me the name of the college if you know.
Yeah. Please unmute Mr. Atul.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can also switch on your video so that you can directly ask. I think we can move on to the next person since they're not responding.
Yes. Can you please unmute Major General Dutt? He's there. In fact, Dutt uncle, he retired in 1996 as the Major General. And right now he's the trustee of Prakash Deep, which is doing a great work for underprivileged children.
Good evening.
Yes,
Sandeep, I'd like to ask you a small question. You talked about the 2611 terrorists.
Yes.
the way they performed, they appeared to be regular army soldiers. Because otherwise, you cannot have that excellent performance like our commanders performed. So can they be really civilians? That is my question.
Well, so these were specially trained terrorists, as in they had a very large bunch of them, and from that large bunch of terrorists, they taken, they down selected exactly the way we select commandos in our special forces. That's how they did it. They had a very large group, and from that group, they selected very small volunteers, small number of volunteers for very. I think they rated them mentally, their mental strength, because the whole idea of that attack was to prolong the attack. They wanted this attack to continue for several days, and they were very, very well trained. In fact, if you see that one CCTV footage from 26/11, the night at the Oberoi, there is a the two terrorist teams enter the hotel almost simultaneously, the old Taj, and one group of terrorists opens fire at the other group without knowing that they are there. And if you see the reaction of these two terrorists, the way they split and they take cover behind the pillars, you're not
They're
wrong in
experienced
believing
people.
that they could actually have been conventional, military soldiers. So that's how well trained they were.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Uncle. Shreya, can you unmute Mr. Kulkarni? I think he's back now.
Yes.
Atulji, are you around? No? No, then we'll go back to, yeah. Can you please?
In the meanwhile, I'll ask another question for the quiz. So please reply privately to me. The Bangladeshi naval commandos were trained by the Indian Army, Indian Navy divers in a historical location in West Bengal. Please tell me the name and the significance of it, the name of the location.
I hope the question was clear to everybody.
Yes, yes. I think I've already gotten the answer, so we can move
Okay.
on.
Shreya, can you unmute Priya Sehgal? She's an author and she's a political talk show host. Yes. Priya. Yes. You can switch on your video also, Priya.
We can hear you. No. We can't hear you. Can you? No, we can't hear you. I think maybe we can come back to you. Okay, next person.
Yes. Can you unmute Mr. Niranjan Pandit? He's a IT consultant. Niranjan, you can go ahead with your one question, please, right now. I know you have many. Yes.
Thanks for
We can't hear you, Niranjan.
You're not clear.
I have unmuted myself. Hello.
Yes, go on.
I can hear you.
Okay. I have three questions basically. Number one being, as you rightly said, there was no protocol or policy framework in place when in 2008 the terrorist attack, and the whole thing was being covered live, and that's how the operators of the terrorists were taking advantage. They could guide the terrorists. But the same thing also repeated when our pilot Vardhaman landed in Pakistan, and again his key sensitive information such as what is his village, where he lives, and entire that information was being covered on the television well. So you rightly said that there was no framework, and now there is a framework. But the point is, unless until there is a fear of repercussions or some action taken against the media whenever they're indulging in compromising national security, I think things will not change. So please shed more light on that. Secondly, please also tell us about the coverage by politicians after the attack, because as we all know, 26/11 attack happened, and after that there were visits to the Taj Hotel by politicians. The purpose of the visits was less to condole, take situation, like take account of the situation, and more for the purpose of making a movie. And thirdly, we also got to hear that while there was attack going on in the same area, some posh buildings were carrying out partying at the same time. And when they were told to stop partying, they became unhappy. Like if there is a national security emergency going on and some terrorists are killing people, how are we concerned? So please guide us on these topics. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Niranjan. So this your first question on Wing Commander Abhinandan Vardhaman. He was captured by the Pakistanis after the Balakot attacks. Now, there was a lot of coverage of his, downing. There was a lot of social media. In fact, that story broke out on social media before it was picked up by the national television. Now, the important thing there is that this is one instance of social media actually saving lives. Because had those villagers not filmed him while they captured him, it's quite possible that Abhinandan Vardhaman would have actually been taken away by the Pakistan security forces and not disclosed. The fact that they have captured an Indian pilot and they could have, tortured him or, kept him as a prisoner of war, a prisoner of that operation, and not revealed the fact that he was alive. But here was one case where social media actually revealed to the world that an Indian pilot had been captured by the Pakistanis, and there's no way they could deny the fact that he was there. And that actually allowed the Indian government to move in and mount pressure to secure his release. So I think that was the primary objective, to ensure that he was safe, nothing happened to him, and that he came back. And he was back in about 3 or 4 days. So that's one example I always hold out of social media actually saving a life of one of our soldiers.
May I please interrupt, sir? I'm sorry.
Yes.
My question was regarding coverage of the key information of Vardhaman himself.
Right.
Because they were literally being the way they are, the animals in Pakistan, torturing him, Vardhaman, to get his information, and all he was revealing was what is my rank and that I am a Air Force officer or pilot or whatever. And these channels were reaching out to his house and on media, on television.
Yeah, so that part is really unfortunate.
Again, so in spite of policy framework in place,
yes,
that didn't have. So unless until there is an example that once you disclose national information which is key for security, there will be repercussions. Unless we lay down certain examples, I don't think this is going to stop.
No, that should never happen. They should never have gone to his family or try to interview him or anything, because the government should have immediately put a blanket ban, and they have done that in other cases, that they have kept families away from the glare of the media, because it helps save the life of the person who's been captured or something like that. You don't want to give too much information away, but this is one. I mean, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. It could have been far worse, but I think there was an intervention at some point. And regarding the second part of your question, where you spoke about the political visits to the thing, I mean, that is absolutely uncalled for. I mean, there's no way anyone should have done that. There was a filmmaker who was touring that site with the politicians, and that it deserved the strongest possible condemnation. And I think it was very, very severely condemned at that point, and it seriously embarrassed the people in Pillay. And the third part of your question, I didn't quite understand. There was partying going on, you said, while the attacks were on in 26/11?
Yes, sir. What I don't have the key specific details of the same.
Right.
But what I got to hear was in the Kolaba area or some area, there was partying going on. And when they got to, they were informed that there is an attack on the innocent people are dying and this whole thing is happening. So the response, the security or the people who informed them got it, what do we have got to do with it? If there is an attack on our hotel and so many people are dying, it's a terrorist attack on the nation. How are we concerned? That was the response. So
I mean, what can I say, Neeraj? I mean, it's really heartless and insensitive of them to have parties. I mean, it's just terrible. I mean, what they did.
Thank you, Niranjan. Thank you for the questions. Shreya, can you unmute Mercy? Sandeep, Mercy is the lead singer of the Naga folk fusion band That's Your Sister. In fact, she's a very, very popular singer from Nagaland. And she joined in from there to ask you a question. Mercy? Yeah.
Hi.
Hello, Mercy.
All right. Hi. That was so much fun to listen to you. My question is from a creative perspective because, as a writer of nonfiction, how much creative liberties can you take or do you take in telling the stories you want to? And what about the sense of responsibility that rests on you? That is the first part of the question. My second half is like, do you see any potential for a future piece of work based on there are lots of military operations that have been happening over the years in the Northeast? So what do you think?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Mercy. Now, the first part of your question, it's a big challenge for a non-fiction writer to put down a book about a military operation or indeed any aspect of military history. The fact is that corroboration is really important, and I have to be very, very careful about what I put down there. I cannot allow my imagination to run wild. For instance, there was a clear example in Operation X where a veteran that I met told me a fascinating story of how he had captured one of the key characters in this book and interrogated him, and then discovered that he was actually an Indian officer who was working undercover. Fascinating story. And, I wrote it down. But the problem is when I tried to corroborate the story, I couldn't find any corroborative evidence. I mean, there was nobody else who could back up that story. And I had to just let it go because as interesting as it might have sounded, this story couldn't stand on two legs. So I had to discard it. So there've been many such examples where, there are a lot of black holes which I don't know the answers to, and I have to say that, look, I really don't know what the thing was there. I tried my best to get this answer to this question, but I couldn't. Like, for instance, I don't know till date, what was the political oversight of this Operation X? As in, I know for a fact that the Prime Minister was involved, as in she gave the directives for this operation. It could not have happened without the highest political authority signing off on a covert war. But I didn't know what kind of planning went in the political leadership at that time, because all the political leaders are dead and gone, and they haven't left any memoirs or they haven't declassified any papers. So it becomes very difficult for a student of military literature to follow up on such black holes. So you have to kind of say that, look, I tried, but I couldn't get it. This is an unanswered question, and probably sometime in the future there will be a document that emerges that answers that question. So the second part of your question, yes, the Northeast, it's a very, very fascinating area. There's been an insurgency on for many years, for decades. It's been on since the 50s. There have been many stories that have come out of there, incredible stories of valor. And one of the finest stories that I know of from the Northeast is a very close friend of mine, Colonel Pillay, who was in Manipur. He was in an ambush in a Naga village, and he was grievously wounded during that ambush with the Naga militants. And many years later, he actually went back to that village and met with the people that he had saved. There was a little girl who he had saved on that day in 1994. He had actually asked for the helicopter that had come to rescue him to take that little girl to the hospital and save her. That girl had, she had grown up into a fine young lady, and she was married and she had kids. And now he has literally adopted that village. The villagers adopted him. And I think that is the most fascinating story that I've ever written out of the Northeast. I mean, it was a small story in India today. It was a human interest story, but I'm sure there are hundreds of stories like this that are just waiting to be discovered.
I think that would be really good for your next book.
We'll look forward to that. Yeah, for sure. More stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mercy.
Thank you.
I would just like to move on to the next question for the quiz. Kindly privately answer me. Name the two famous musicians who organized the concert for Bangladesh that raised awareness about the atrocities in East Pakistan at the Madison Square Gardens in August 1st, 1971. So, would you like me to repeat my question?
I think Shreya, repeat your question, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
Name the two famous musicians who organized the concert for Bangladesh at the Madison Square Gardens on August 1st, 1971. So kindly privately answer that while we move on to our next person in the interactive round.
Shreya, please try Priya again if she's around still.
No, I think she's left the meeting. We'll have to move on to the next person.
All right. And Mr. Atul, will you like to unmute him?
Yes.
I think there is some problem with the bandwidth he has. Okay. So I suppose you can ask your last quiz question and then declare the winners too.
Yes.
I think Asha Dhamia has been wanting to ask a question. Can you maybe read the question, or you would like to unmute her?
I'll just unmute her so that he can.
She's an educator. Yeah.
Please unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. It was a pleasure hearing you, sir. I'm a political science teacher and have been talking to my students excessively about the topic. So my question to you is, so with India's military capacity, with the Rafales and other high-tech weapons we have included in our weapon armory, do you think, should we believe that India is capable enough to tackle China single-handedly, China's aggressive policy? Or would we be looking at the Western powers towards the superpowers? Or are we capable enough to control the situation in the continent, in this region, on our own, like a regional power? Thank you.
Thank you, Asha. It's a very interesting question. It actually depends on what kind of military threat that we face from China. That would be the primary threat assessment. That if we face a threat across our land borders, for instance, then we are alone in this. We will have to fight it ourselves. If we face a threat, say at sea, then we have other countries that we can partner with. But the important thing is here that it is a concert of democracies at the end of the day that will win the day with China. And I believe there are moves afoot within the government to act in concert with the other democracies in Asia, like Japan, Australia, and of course the United States. So you have these four countries that are going to come together, which have a common security threat perception from China. Because as we now know, China's rise is not a peaceful rise. They have military ambitions on other countries, and indeed on their borders, on contested boundaries that they have with other countries. They have not averse to using military force to settle those boundaries, as we've seen recently over the last 4 months in Ladakh. They have violated several treaties that we've had, several confidence building measures that we've had with the Chinese. So what this is going to do in effect is force us to divert resources away from our social spending programs, our welfare programs, into the military. Now, this is not in anyone's interest. So my personal belief is that we are going to be seeing some kind of a loose alliance of countries that have that are threatened by the rise of China. Indeed, this huge military machine that the Chinese are building up. It will have to be a collaborative effort from a lot of countries, because we don't have the resources, we don't have the kind of resources that the Chinese have been able to pour into their armed forces over the last couple of years. I mean, in the sheer scale of it dwarfs us, but I would imagine that if it was a localized conflict of the kind in Ladakh, we are more than capable of handling the Chinese attack. But if it is an attack on multiple fronts, for instance, if
full-fledged war.
A full-fledged war in, say, where they activate, say, Pakistan, and they activate multiple fronts on the line of actual control, then it is going to be a very, very tough ask for the armed forces. But I'm sure the government is looking at strategies to counter this, because, like I mentioned earlier, that it's only when the enemy arrives at your gates that you realize that, it's a clear and present danger, and then you have to accelerate your preparations. But while we've prepared for the Chinese threat for several years, it's just manifested itself lately. So I think there is going to be a compression of time schedules in the next couple of months and years.
Okay. So Taiwan, Vietnam, and recently Russia also, like taking up an offensive attitude towards China. Are these positive signals for us?
Yeah, certainly. So I like I mentioned that there is going to be a loose alliance of sorts against the Chinese, that whether it is intelligence sharing or training or selling equipment, making common military protocols, all of that is going to happen. It's going to be accelerated in the next couple of months and years, because the fact that all these countries that you just mentioned have a common threat from the rise of China. This is the kind of threat that most of these countries have never faced in their existence. And China's contention all along over the last 30 years is that they had this expression called the peaceful rise of China, that they lulled everybody into this sense of complacency that we will not use our military to enforce border disputes. But now that we're seeing a very different side to the Chinese in the last couple of years, as their military has come to a certain critical mass. They believe that they can use that military against their neighbors, which is a really
one border, one road,
That's
and all
correct.
those
Yes.
stuff. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Asha.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think since we are running out of time, we'll just take one more interactive round question and one last question I have for the quiz round. Kindly answer me privately and
Okay. I think, Atul, you need to mute yourself. Yeah.
No, it's okay. You can go ahead with your question.
Yeah. Mr. Kulkarni. He's
I'm
the
sorry.
member.
I'm sorry. I was actually, I'm actually jumping from one event to another. There's a event simultaneously happening. The Northeastern community from Essex is hosting one event talking about Northeast. So I was kind of pulled up there. Sandeep, great. I was listening to you, obviously. My question is actually a follow-up of what Brian asked you initially, the first question that Brian had. There are about 67 conflict zones in the world today, and most of them happen to be along the coastline. And what we are seeing and the situation that is developing in South China and also some parts of Indian Ocean. Do you think that, this is something, again, I said was a follow-up of what Brian asked you. Do you think the emphasis on our land borders has some kind of created, a mindset wherein, although it was a covert operation in 71, but now that looking back in the hindsight, if we had the control on Chittagong and Mongla ports, and thereby the entire Bay of Bengal, I think our geostrategic position now would have been completely different. How do you respond to that? Because both your books are actually related to that kind of situation.
Yeah, that's correct, Atulji. Both my books have a maritime element in that, and the fact that it's good that you pointed that out. In Operation X, of course, it was this thing called, what the Navy did was commerce destruction. There is actually a word in naval strategy. It's called guerre de course. It's a French word. I hope I pronounced it correctly. It means commerce destruction. When you destroy your adversary's merchant shipping and you kind of cut off his supplies from the sea. They did that using naval commandos. The garrison in East Pakistan was cut off from the sea. They bombed the ships that were bringing in ammunition and arms and military material in. So that was a kind of covert commerce destruction that they did. And of course, in 2611, it was a naval commando operation that the Pakistani deep state carried out using these non-state actors. So the sea lanes are really important. And in fact, after the 2611 attacks, you have a whole lot of coastal radars coming up, very large maritime domain awareness strategy that the Navy has put into place, which means that now they know for the first time the identity of any ship in the Indian Ocean. They're able to detect and track all merchant ships, all vessels in the Indian Ocean region. They have very sophisticated, computing abilities and detection abilities. And the analogy is simple. The corollary is simple, that if you can detect and track an object, then you can target it as well in times of war. So it's a very important capability. And yes, so now the thing about our landward focus is that the land, till the time that we have unsettled boundaries with China and Pakistan, you are going to have to deploy the armed forces. You'll have to deploy an army on both borders to protect these borders, to ensure that there's no attempt to change the boundaries, like what happened in 1962 or what happened in Kargil in 1999. If, for instance, the army hadn't moved in, Pakistan would have altered the line of control on the western side. So this is something that is going to remain until the time that you're able to break out of these disputes, either by figuring out dispute resolution, or by building up forces to an extent that the other side doesn't think it is possible to alter the line without military action. Unless those things are aren't worked out, our maritime focus is not going to remain. Now, the fact is that the figures are there for you to see that our naval spending, our spending on the Indian Navy, is one of the lowest it has been as a percentage of the defense budget in several years. The ideal spend would be about 18 to 20%, but now it's down to as low as 12%, 12 and 13%. So that does not allow the Navy to buy those many assets. The Navy is a very capital intensive service. It needs ships, it needs submarines, it needs aircraft. So if you don't have the kind of budgetary resources, you're unable to buy those assets. And till the time that your budgetary allocations are low, because of this landward focus, you can't focus on the maritime segment. So this is something that the government will really have to work out in the years ahead. I hope that answers your question, Atulji.
Thank you. Thank you, Atulji. We have one last question. Actually, we are running out of time, but Colonel Pillay is here, and he's a war-decorated veteran, and he's also a research fellow from ITSA. So, Colonel Pillay, would you like to ask? Yeah.
No, firstly, I want to thank Sandeep for his, this. I'm sorry I got a bit late in connecting up. I missed a lot of his, but it's good that I know him, and we've been benefiting from his wisdom. And he's amongst the very few journalists today who are unbiased and, who actually are true to journalism. I want to first thank Sandeep for those two lovely books that he's written. Because as a soldier and understanding the importance of studying military history, I realized that how important it is for us to record these events, for our future generation. I just want to know what is Sandeep's idea. Firstly, why did you choose to do this book, particularly on the Operation X, and why do you think that we Indians lack an ability to, record and be proud about our history and kind of learn from them and actually, what is the reason that we are lacking in this? And how do we encourage Indians to actually take up study of military operations and historical events? Sandeep?
Yeah, thank you, Colonel Pillay, sir. That's a very interesting question. And Colonel Pillay is a historian himself. He keeps unearthing a lot of subjects to write on. He does a lot of great work at the IDSA. In fact, I just read a very, very interesting article by him today on the Imperial Cholas, where he actually talks about this South Indian dynasty of the Cholas who ruled for almost 1,000 years. And they were the first, the imperial maritime powers, mercantile military power that, use the military to protect their maritime interests. So the fact is that despite having a dynasty, I want to take off from that article that you wrote. Despite having all this great rich history, we haven't studied our own history. We haven't documented it. I think we are at the stage that of basic survival, that we aren't able to kind of divert attention and resources towards the study of history. We have a history that's thousands of years. I mean, the subjects that I write about are relatively easy to document as compared to something like the Chola dynasty that happened over 1,000 years back. This calls for back-breaking research, calls for investments of a kind that probably only governments can afford at this point. And just the way that we don't invest enough in research and development. Our R&D spends are among the lowest in the world. We don't invest equally on the research of our own history, studying our own history, and indeed even documenting our own history as the history that is made as we go forward. That history even is not documented or filed, or it's a bizarre thing that problem that confronts military students of military history, that we don't value history, we don't document it, we don't declassify histories. We're not proud of anything that we have done, and it just remains, these one-man shows that you have Captain Samant who decides to write his memoirs, or there's someone who, like Colonel Sandeep Sen, for instance, says that, look, we need to get the truth of 2611 out. There is no institutional thrust towards preserving or collecting histories, or getting a very objective analysis of events and indeed learning from that. Like, for instance, the Indian deployment in Sri Lanka, Operation Pawan, not very long ago, little over 3 decades ago, we are yet to get a very authentic account of what exactly happened, the entire decision-making process. This was the first time that Indian forces had been deployed overseas, not under a United Nations flag. What are the thought process behind the government's deployment of that? So these are very, very important lessons that we just chose to brush under the carpet. We only want to write about those great things that we have done, the few wars that we may have fought and triumphed over. So you have this thing of writing hagiographies of these wonderful things that suit your narrative, whereas we're not critical enough of, say, operations that may have gone wrong, for instance, like to study Operation Blue Star or Operation Pawan in Sri Lanka, or many other military operations. So we're not very objective students of our own history, and it's a perennial problem, and all of us face that. Colonel Pillay faces that, I'm sure, in IDSA. Journalists like me face that on a regular basis. We don't get authentic accounts, we don't get declassified accounts. We have to rely on a lot of oral sources, and it becomes difficult to corroborate oral accounts. So it's a big challenge to do history, and invariably you will find Indian military students going and researching in Indian subjects in foreign libraries and archives, because they have better archiving, they have better research facilities than we have over here. So I mean, the moot point is that if we are to grow as the world's third largest economy, indeed we will be the world's third largest economy very soon, and we become a power in our own right, we have to build up, invest more in our military history, invest more in our own history to build up this a certain sense of pride of where we came from. I mean, I'm not saying that it should be a kind of pride that derides someone else or something, but the very fact that our own glorious past of 2000 years plus, you run an objective sense of our history. You will never know where you came from. You never have pride in your roots and all that if you don't research your history. You will forever be you'll be fated to be a country whose histories are written by a foreign power. Right? The British wrote most of our histories, so we've not really had a chance to do a post-colonial interpretation of our own history. It's a long answer. I think it's a subject in itself for a seminar. I hope that answers your question, sir.
No, it's we are grateful that you actually got that Operation X out, because I personally never knew about this kind of a thing. It's a very, like you said about and how the Pakistanis launched this operation against us in 2611. That's a very fascinating story, and the sad, like you very right, we don't want to learn from our own mistakes that we made. 61, 62, the orders, Henderson Bhagat report is not declassified. Yeah. We've not learned our lessons in Sri Lanka. But all Western democracies that have actually progressed, they actually learn from them. And our ability to critique ourselves and our weaknesses and all, it's a great strength because we learn from them. And it's important for future generations, and I'm really grateful that you've actually taken the trouble of researching and bringing out this, because it also enables future military commanders to know that, yeah, you can actually use people, train them. I like your video where Henry Kissinger talks about that people who are destroying sophisticated hand, that video of your Operation X that goes, you have Henry Kissinger talk about it. It's like, they said there's a professional hand in that. So it's a good thing. And I'm really grateful that people like you do really write these things. And thank you very much. Thank you for your answer too.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
I think even I agree that our history has been very, it's not been very subjectively recorded. And, over these course of our conversations, what we didn't realize, we also had a lot of authors coming in who had done work like you, non-fiction. So we had Vikram Sampath, who had written about Savarkar. We had Major General Bakshi, who had written about Bose and Gandhi, that comparison. And through those conversations, we realized so much. And, we had audiences telling us about a lot of things that they weren't aware. So in that way, these conversations are also very important to, take out and actually objectively look at a situation that happened years ago that we are not aware of at all. So I agree, we need to concentrate and actually work more towards recording our history. I think
take up the last question of quiz, and then you can maybe name the winners.
Yeah. Yes, I'll just take up the last question. So again, I am just choosing the winners based on the person who answers first. So please be quick. What was the name of the unit of the National Security Guard which neutralized the terrorist in the Mumbai 26/11 attack?
Would you like to repeat the question?
Yes. What was the name of the unit of the National Security Guard which neutralized the terrorist in the Mumbai 26/11 attack? The name of the unit of the National Security Guard. I've gotten two answers which say National Security Guard itself. I'm just asking the unit.
Maybe you can take up one more question, so that, because we have 4 books signed by Sandeep.
I've gotten the correct answer now. Yes.
Okay. Great. You'd like to name the winners?
Yes. So we have 4 winners. For the first question, it was Mamta Sharma. Second was Nisha Nagpal. The third was Rajesh Sarin. And the fourth was Ankit Alok.
Fantastic. I think congratulations to all the winners. These questions are really superb, and I suppose they really enhance your knowledge, whenever you have such kind of questions. Sandeep, thank you so much. We have taken so much of your time. We were supposed to end this session at 7, but you know how it is. Nobody wanted to leave you. I mean, they want to know so much from you. I think you'll have to come back as soon as your 3rd book is out once again. And, it was such a wonderful session. Your enthusiasm to talk with so much ease on such complicated issues is absolutely indeed appreciable. They're so much wiser on all the topics that you touched today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Neeta. Thank you, Shreya. And thank my readers and the audience for your patience and listening to me, and for those absolutely wonderful questions. I mean, some of them are really, really good. I mean, I couldn't have thought of those, but thank you so much.
I think
thank you for giving your books to the readers, and the ones who have answered are the ones who really have been following up Indian history, I would say, and the Indian current issues very, very closely. And I'm sure they're the privileged ones. There were a lot of right answers, but then we had to give to the first one who answers the right one. Yes.
Fastest finger first.
Fastest finger first. Absolutely.
So
this is how it happened today.
On Black Tornado, I mean, you have, of course, this is a subject which is being debated over and over. But your comment there that if NSG was to reach in time that they were ready for and they were ready at, I mean, what in your opinion could have been the outcome of that operation?
Well, if the NSG had reached in time, I guess they would have we would have actually seen a very different end to, because there was a delay in sending the NSG. People did not. It's exactly like you're unable to diagnose a problem, and you're giving the wrong medicine to the patient. So here there was a huge time lag in diagnosing the problem in Mumbai when the attacks unfolded for whatever reasons, and finally when the NSG landed, it was more than 12 hours later. So maybe the solution was that you had a range of forces already in place that you possibly should have asked the army itself to move in rather than wait for the NSG to come in. So there was something that, and this all comes down to the problem of not having anyone in control over there, on the ground there. Everyone is in control, but no one was in control. So it was that kind of a situation. So possibly this one thing that of using the army itself to end the siege could have been considered. There would have been casualties, unfortunately, but it would not have lasted 3 or 4 days the way it did. Very complicated operation, but I mean, I'm speaking with a thing of hindsight. So I mean, that should be taken into account.
Very right.
Yeah, because I mean, why this is important to me is mind you, I mean, whatever infrastructure, security net that we may have, like the Americans say, even they are not, I mean, foolproof. So
Yes.
they are always on the guard, thinking that there is something that is going to happen. I think we are also in a similar situation. So
True.
we definitely need to have. I'm sure they are. SOPs are now in place.
Yes.
But then, as you rightly said, at that point of time, we were, I mean, I won't say we were caught off guard. It was just that we did not realize the gravity, probably, of the situation.
Yes.
Very correct. I think before logging off, if everyone can switch on their videos so that we can just
Yeah. Congratulations, Mr. Sareen, for winning the book. So nice. And Nisha Nagpal, she's around. And who all were there? Shreya? 2 more winners.
and Ankit Alok.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Sandeep. I'm sure it was really a wonderful session. I hope we were able to do justice to your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Neeta. Great speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
RPG.
Thank you. See you very soon.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Take care. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
You too, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone for joining in. Goodbye.